The door was never supposed to be unlocked. Helena Wren stood in the corridor outside the west wing, her hand still pressed flat against the cold iron handle, her breath stolen from her lungs by the sight of what lay beyond. The room was enormous, cathedral-ceilinged, lit by a single window of frosted glass, through which the grey London night pressed in like a bruise, and in the centre of it, surrounded by towers of books, and the wreckage of what had once been a mirror, stood Isidore Skorzeny, Lord of the Nocturne Court, and he was bleeding not from a wound any blade had made. The blood tracked from his palm in slow, deliberate lines, falling onto a folded piece of paper he held, with the careful reverence of someone holding the last remaining piece of a shattered world. His white hair fell forward across his face. His shoulders, always so perfectly squared, so architecturally proud, were curved inward in a way Helena had never seen in 8 months of working in his house. She should have backed away. Every rule of her employment contract, every word of the orientation she had received from Marta, the head of household staff, every single instinct of rational self-preservation, screamed at her to step back, pull the door shut, and forget what she had seen. She stepped inside instead. The floorboard betrayed her with a creak, and Isidore Skorzeny's head snapped up faster than any human being had a right to move. His eyes, pale silver shot through with veins of deep violet, fixed on her with an intensity that should have turned her knees to water. They almost did. Almost. "You have precisely 1 second," he said, and his voice was silk stretched over the edge of a blade, "to explain how you came to be in a room that is locked from the outside. Before I decide whether your presence here constitutes a breach of the blood law compact you signed upon entering my service." "The lock is broken," Helena said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Has been for 3 days. I reported it to Marta. She said she would tell you." A pause. His jaw tightened. She did not, obviously. Helena did not look away from him. She had learned early that breaking eye contact with Isidore, Skorzeny read in whatever ancient instinctual grammar governed his kind as submission. She was not here to submit. "Your hand is bleeding. I am aware. Do you need—" "What I need," he said, each word deliberate as a footstep on ice, "is for you to leave this room. Report the lock to the maintenance office directly, rather than routing through Marta, and forget everything you have seen in the last 90 seconds. Helena looked at the folded paper in his bleeding hand. She looked at the shattered mirror on the floor, the broken frame still bearing traces of gilding, and she looked at the single photograph lying among the glass, face down, which she did not touch and did not try to see. She looked back at him. "I will do all 3 of those things," she said, "if you let me wrap your hand first." The silence that followed was the longest she had ever experienced. Somewhere far below, the house breathed its vast, mechanical breath, climate controls humming, security feeds cycling, the whole clockwork of the Skorzeny residence running itself with the efficiency of a machine that had been calibrated over decades. Outside, London moved and muttered, and could not have cared less about the standoff taking place in the west wing of the most dangerous private residence in the city. Isidore Skorzeny held out his hand. It was not a gesture of trust. She understood that clearly. It was a test, perhaps, or a concession dragged from somewhere so deep he was not fully conscious of making it. She crossed the room, reached into the pocket of her apron where she kept a small first aid kit with the pragmatic habit she had developed. Working 3 years in emergency hotel services before this job, and she did not flinch when his cold fingers closed loosely around her wrist as she pressed the gauze against the cut. "You are not afraid of me," he said. It was not a question. It was closer to something unsettled. "I have a healthy respect for what you are and what you can do," she said, taping the gauze neatly. "That is not the same as fear. Most humans find the distinction academic. I am not most humans." He looked down at his wrapped hand for a long moment. Then he released her wrist and Helena stepped back. And somehow in that 20-foot walk to the door, she felt that something had changed in the room behind her. Something small and tectonic, like the click of a mechanism that had been frozen for a very long time. She did not look back. She pulled the door shut behind her, reported the lock directly to maintenance, and went to bed that night thinking about silver eyes and a piece of paper folded with the tenderness usually reserved for letters from the dead. She had been employed by the Skorzeny household for 8 months before that night, and she had learned a great deal about how to be invisible in a vampire lord's house. The trick, she had discovered, was not to pretend you were not there, which they could see through immediately, but to move with calm purpose and give no one cause to think about you twice. She cleaned the East Library on Tuesdays and Fridays. She managed the household linen inventory on Wednesdays. She was responsible for the greenhouse corridor on the ground floor, which contained no plants that required sunlight and a great many that preferred the dark. She had started there specifically because it was the one area of the house least likely to put her in close proximity to Isidore Skorzeny, or any of the 4 other vampires who maintained a permanent presence in the residence. That plan had lasted exactly 6 weeks. He had found her in the greenhouse corridor on a Thursday morning, which was not her scheduled day, because the temperature regulator on the 3rd bay had gone wrong and the orchids were wilting, and she had come down to check on them because no one else had. He had stood at the end of the corridor watching her work for what she estimated was 4 minutes before she finally acknowledged him. "Lord Skorzeny," she had said, neither startled nor servile. "The temperature regulator is faulty. I have logged a repair request. In the meantime, I am adjusting the moisture levels manually to compensate. These orchids have been dying for 11 years, he had said. Every groundskeeper I have employed has failed to revive them. They are not dying of neglect. They are dying because the bay they are in does not drain properly, and the roots are sitting in stagnant water between waterings. It is a simple fix." He had looked at her for a moment. "And you know this because I looked at the roots," she had said simply. He had walked away, but the next Thursday he had been there again, not doing anything, simply reading at the iron bench at the end of the corridor, and the Thursday after that, and the Thursday after that, until it had become a quiet and entirely unacknowledged arrangement that she tended the greenhouse on Thursdays as well, and he read at the bench, and occasionally one of them said something to the other, and occasionally they did not. She had learned more about him in those silences than she had in 8 months of collecting gossip from the other staff. He preferred silence to music, unless the music was very old. He read in at least 4 languages. He did not drink from the live staff, which was not legally required, but was, she gathered from Marta's careful non-answers, not universal practice among vampire lords of his standing. He watched the orchids with an attention that looked, to her, very much like the attention of someone who had lost something and was not yet certain whether patience or grief was the more appropriate response. After the night in the West Wing, something shifted, not dramatically. He was not the kind of man, or the kind of creature, who did anything dramatically except by necessity. But the following Thursday he was already in the greenhouse when she arrived, which was earlier than usual, and there was a second iron chair beside the bench that had not been there before. She sat in it. "The orchids are recovering," she said, surveying the third bay with professional satisfaction. "Yes," he said. He turned a page. "I noticed they sat in companionable quiet for 20 minutes, and then he said, without looking up from his book, 'The paper you saw, in the West Wing.' I did not see what was written on it," she said. "I saw you were holding it carefully." "It was a letter," he said, "from someone who has been dead for 40 years. I am sorry," she said, and she meant it simply, without performance. He looked up then, and the expression on his face was one she had not seen before on a vampire, or on many humans either. It was the expression of a person who has expected sympathy to feel like an insult and discovered, to their considerable surprise, that it did not. "She was not a romantic attachment," he said, as if answering a question she had carefully not asked. "She was my ward, a human child I was bound to protect under an ancient vow made to her family line. She died in a hospital while I was detained by court politics 300 miles away, and I have never—" He stopped. He closed the book. "I have never forgiven myself the particular cowardice of letting ceremony delay what duty demanded." Helena was quiet for a moment. "The mirror," she said gently, "in the West Wing. She gave it to me. She was 17 when she found it at a market stall and bought it with 3 weeks of her pocket money because she thought the frame was beautiful. His voice was measured, controlled, a careful structure built over something vast. I broke it last week, in a moment of—" He appeared to consider several words and find none of them adequate. "Weakness. It did not look like weakness to me," Helena said. "It looked like grief that has been held too long in one place." He looked at her for a long time. His silver eyes were very still. "You are an extraordinary employee," he said at last, which was so far from what she had expected him to say that she almost laughed, and the almost law softened something between them, and the chair beside the bench remained where it was for all the Thursdays that followed. There were things Helena knew about the vampire world, because you could not work in a house like this and remain ignorant. She knew that the Nocturne Court was one of 5 ancient governing bodies that maintained the blood law compact with human society, a secret treaty that had been rewritten 17 times in 800 years and currently ran to 600 pages of densely argued supernatural legislation. She knew that Isidore Skorzeny held the title of Lord Paramount of the London seat, which meant he was responsible for enforcing the compact within a 200-mile radius of the city, adjudicating disputes between vampire clans and representing the Nocturne Court in any negotiation with the other 4 courts when their interests collided. She knew he was over 400 years old, though he looked, in the way that vampires did, like a man in his early 40s, all sharp-planed elegance and white hair cut close at the sides with the faintest wave at the crown. Tall and broad-shouldered and dressed always in dark colors that made his pallor look intentional rather than biological. She knew he had enemies. She learned exactly how many on the night 3 weeks after the West Wing, when she came down to the kitchen for a glass of water at 2:30 in the morning and found Fenwick, one of the 4 resident vampires, standing over a human man who was unconscious on the kitchen floor. Fenwick was the youngest of Isidore's household, turned only 60 years ago, with dark eyes and sharp cheekbones and an expression that had always, to Helena's private assessment, held the particular gleam of someone who had decided the rules applied to everyone, except themselves, He looked up when Helena entered, and he did not look alarmed. He looked, instead, entertained. "Back to bed, Maid," he said. Helena looked at the unconscious man on the floors. He was breathing. He was wearing a delivery company uniform, which was a brazen piece of cover, if she had ever seen one. His hands were bound with something that smelled of iron, and there was a puncture mark on his neck that was already bruising, which meant Fenwick had fed from him, which was a direct and unambiguous violation of the blood law compact as it applied to unconsenting humans within the residential boundary. "I do not think I will," she said. Fenwick's expression shifted from entertained to something sharper. "You are a human female in a house full of vampires at 2 in the morning, he said. "The mathematics of this situation are not complicated." "Lord Skorzeny," Helena said, and her voice did not shake, though the hand she pressed against the doorframe was white-knuckled, "has zero tolerance for compact violations within his residential boundary. I know this because I have read the household charter, which every staff member receives upon employment. You have committed at least 3 of them in the last 10 minutes. Lord Skorzeny," Fenwick said, and his lip curled, "is occupied with court business and is not at home tonight." He stepped forward. "Which is, of course, precisely why I chose tonight." Helena moved before she had fully consciously decided to. She was not heroic about it. She picked up the cast-iron pan from the stovetop with both hands, which was heavy enough to bruise even a vampire significantly, and she swung it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had once worked the night shift at a hotel in Glasgow and had developed a robust philosophy about the non-negotiability of her own safety. The sound it made when it connected with Fenwick's left temple was deeply satisfying. He was not unconscious, because he was a vampire, but he staggered, and in the 3 seconds of his staggering, Helena had already pressed the emergency contact on the household security panel beside the kitchen door, the one that looked like an ordinary light switch, but connected directly to the Lord Paramount's personal security line, and the one that Marta had shown her with the quiet seriousness of someone passing on a genuinely important inheritance. Fenwick had straightened and turned to face her with an expression that was no longer even remotely entertained when the kitchen door opened. Isidore Skorzeny was not supposed to be home. He walked in with the absolute economy of motion that Helena had learned was what his kind looked like when they were controlling something very large and very dangerous in themselves, and he took in the scene in the kitchen in approximately 1 second, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees without any mechanical explanation. "Step away from her," he said to Fenwick, and his voice was so quiet it was almost gentle, which was, Helena understood instinctively, the most dangerous register he had. Fenwick had the sense to step back, but not enough sense to look properly afraid. "She attacked me," he said. "The maid assaulted a member of your household. Under the blood law compact, the penalty for a human striking a vampire. The blood law compact," Isidore said, still in that terrible, quiet voice, "also specifies that a human acting in defense of themselves or an unconsenting victim against a compact violation is categorically protected from that statute. Did you believe I would not know the text of the law I am responsible for enforcing? Did you believe, Fenwick?" And here the quiet cracked slightly at the edges. "That I would not come home?" Fenwick went very still. Isidore crossed the kitchen to where Helena stood with the cast-iron pan still in both hands, and he did something she had not expected. He took the pan from her with great care, as though it was fragile rather than heavy, and set it on the counter, and then he turned her toward him with one hand on her shoulder, and he looked at her with an expression that cut straight through regal and dangerous and arrived somewhere considerably more raw. "Are you hurt?" he said. "I am not," she said. He did not touch me." A pause in which she watched him process this with a thoroughness that looked very much like relief being held under enormous pressure. "Good," he said. Then he turned back to Fenwick, and the rawness was gone and the dangerous was back, and he said 4 sentences in a language Helena did not speak, and Fenwick left the kitchen with the speed of someone who has just fully understood the mathematics of their situation. Isidore turned back to her. The man on the floor, breathing, bitten but not severely. He will need medical attention, and his memory will need to be addressed before he wakes. He was looking at her strangely. "You hit Fenwick with a cast iron pan." "I did. That takes a significant amount of force to affect a vampire meaningfully." "I am aware. I swung with the full rotation of my hips and upper body, not just the arms." The expression on his face was briefly, extraordinarily unguarded. "Helena," he said, which was the first time he had used her name without a title attached. "Please sit down." She sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from her, which she had never seen him do at a kitchen table before, and for a while neither of them spoke, while downstairs some quiet, efficient protocol was engaged to take care of the man on the floor, and outside Fenwick, presumably, went wherever one went after being devastatingly outgambled by a housemaid. "He has been building toward a challenge to my position for some time," Isidore said finally. "I knew it. I allowed it to continue because evidence presented cleanly is more effective than suspicion voiced prematurely. Tonight he believed I was genuinely absent. Tonight he overstepped in a way that is documented on the security system and witnessed by a credible third party." He looked at her. "You were never in any danger of me treating this as anything other than what it was." "I know," she said. "That is not why I pressed the panel." He looked at the man on the floor, who had been moved by some unseen hand to the corridor. "Why did you?" "Because you needed to know," she said simply. "Whatever Fenwick is planning, you needed the clearest possible evidence of it tonight. And standing here with the pan in my hands was not going to achieve that as well as calling you would. You were calm enough in the middle of that situation to think strategically. I was terrified," she said. "I just do not stop thinking when I am terrified. It seems counterproductive." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very carefully, as if the words were finding a path through complicated terrain, "I have been responsible for a great many people over 400 years. Staff, wards, court dependents, allies. I have built the habit of protecting them at a distance that they do not feel is distance. It is cleaner, more efficient, leaves less room for the kind of error that comes from personal attachment." He paused. "I mention this because I find, tonight, that the distance I have maintained with you feels insufficient, and I believe you should be informed of that before it becomes relevant in a way that complicates your employment." Helena looked at him for a long time. "I have been aware," she said, "that you have been maintaining a distance. I have also been aware that it has been narrowing for several months. I have not discouraged it." She met his silver eyes steadily. "I mention this because you should also be informed of that." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Then he said, and it was the closest thing to discomfited she had ever heard from him, "I am 431 years old, and you look to be about 43, she said. "I am 28. The arithmetic of our physical appearances is not as dramatic as the calendar would suggest." The arithmetic of our natures is more complicated, and I think we both know it is the latter that you are actually concerned about. You are perceptive to a degree, I find." He stopped. "Inconvenient," she offered. "I was going to say unprecedented," he said, "but inconvenient is also accurate. And there, in the kitchen at 3 in the morning with the smell of iron still in the air and the quiet hum of the house around them, something that had been carefully held at arm's length for months moved one step closer, and neither of them named it, but neither of them stepped back. Fenwick's removal from the household was handled with the bureaucratic thoroughness of a court that had been doing this for 800 years. He was brought before the Nocturne Court's internal judiciary. The security footage was presented. Helena's witness statement was recorded by a court recorder she had not known existed until a very somber woman in a grey suit appeared in Isidore's study and spent 2 hours taking down exactly what Helena had seen and heard and done, and at the end of it, Fenwick was divested of his court standing and removed from London. He was not destroyed. Helena had asked about this carefully, and Isidore had explained with the methodical patience he brought to everything he considered important to explain properly, that the Blood Law Compact had specific provisions about punishing its violations with disproportionate force, and that his position as Lord Paramount required him to be seen upholding the Compact's own standards of measured consequence rather than his personal preferences in the matter. "And your personal preference," she said, from across the desk in the study, where they had been going through the court documentation together because he had asked for her witness, was not measured, he said, and did not elaborate, and she did not push. What came after Fenwick's removal was a period of several weeks that felt, in retrospect, like the tide going out before a wave. Things were quieter than they had been. The household settled into a new equilibrium. The orchids in the third bay bloomed, which Isidore documented with a photograph that he put, she noticed, in a small silver frame on the desk in his study, which was not a room the cleaning staff ordinarily accessed, and which she knew about, only because he had begun inviting her there. In the evenings, when his court correspondence was finished, and the house had quieted, they talked about extraordinary things in those evenings. He told her about the rewriting of the Blood Law Compact in 1742 and the 3-year war that had preceded it, and the peculiar political genius of the vampire who had brokered the peace, a woman named Vasilia Morin, who had subsequently retired from all court politics and opened a bookshop in Vienna that, by his telling, still existed. She told him about the hotel in Glasgow and the 3 years she had spent moving between cities, finding work in the post-lockdown world, becoming good at reading houses and the people in them, because it was the skill that had kept her employed. She told him about her grandmother, who had died when she was 24, and had been the kind of person who looked at a root system to understand what a plant needed. "She sounds like someone worth having known," he said. "She was the best person I have ever known," Helena said. "Until recently he was very still for a moment. That is a significant thing to say to a vampire," he said. "I know," she said. "I said it on purpose." He looked at the desk between them, then out the window at the London night, then back at her, and there was a war happening somewhere behind his silver eyes that she did not pretend she could fully map, but whose outcome she was beginning, cautiously, to hope for. "Helena," he said. "Isidore," she said, which was the first time she had used his given name without the title, and it cost her something, but in the way a door cost you something when you walk through it. a particular kind of weightless expenditure. He came, around the desk. He moved with that inhuman economy of motion, but the economy was doing something different now. It was not restraint so much as precision, as if he was being very careful about something breakable. He stopped in front of her. He was close enough that she could see the fine detail of his irises, the silver and the violet in conversation with each other. "I closed off a part of myself," he said, "after Sarasta died, my ward. I decided that the particular kind of care that had made her loss so—" He stopped, started again. "I decided that the architecture of my life would be more sound if I did not leave that particular door open." "And yet," she said softly. "And yet," he said, "you found it unlocked." She reached up and pressed her hand flat against his chest, over the left side, where his heart beat slowly and steadily in a way that should have been alien but felt, somehow, like something she had been listening for. "What do you want to do about that?" she said. He covered her hand with his, cold and careful, and then he did something she had not expected from him, and could not have predicted from any of the careful months of learning his habits. He pressed her hand harder against his chest, not possessively, but as if he was anchoring himself to something. "I want," he said, very quietly, "to be extraordinarily careful with you. I want that to mean that I do not attempt to compress what I feel into something manageable and push it back behind a door. I want it to mean the opposite of that." He paused. "I am 431 years old, and I am less certain of how to proceed than I have been about anything in 3 centuries. Helena's heart was doing something very loud in the quiet room. "Careful is all right," she said. "Careful with me is welcome. But if you need permission to feel something, here it is." He kissed her then, with the particular quality of someone doing something simultaneously ancient and entirely new, something they had the full weight of centuries behind them, and were still discovering the specific details of for the first time. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was a very quiet one, careful and warm in the way that warmth can be a choice rather than a temperature. And when he drew back and looked at her, his silver eyes were different in a way she could not entirely articulate, except that they were open in a manner they had not been before. "I should tell you," he said, still very close, "that this will not be a simple thing. My position carries dangers that do not stay politely outside personal matters. You have seen some of them, there are others you have not." "I know," she said. "The other courts will have opinions. There are blood law provisions governing the public formalization of relationships between vampires of standing and humans in their employ, not prohibitory ones, but ones that create scrutiny and procedural complexity." "I know," she said again. "I read the household charter, all of it." He looked at her. "You read all 600 pages of the blood law compact as well, did you not?" "The relevant sections," she said. "Yes. The night after I pressed the security panel, actually. It seemed like something I ought to understand." The expression on his face was the one she had seen briefly in the kitchen, deeply and genuinely unguarded, and this time it stayed a little longer. "Of course you did," he said, and there was something in it that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same family, warm and astonished and real. The wave came 6 weeks later, and it came from a direction that made a particular cold kind of sense once it arrived. There were 4 other vampire courts in Britain, and of those, the one that had historically been most likely to contest the Nocturne Court's precedence was the Ashful Court of the Midlands, led by a vampire named Keldreth Voss, who was older than Isidore, and had the kind of patience that made 600 years look like a reasonable timeline for planning a move. He had not been present at Fenwick's tribunal, but he had sent observers, and he had been quietly receiving Fenwick in his own court since the removal, and what he had built from those two facts was something that arrived on a Wednesday morning as a formal challenge to Isidore's position as Lord Paramount. Helena heard about it from Isidore directly, which was not, she suspected, how most household staff learned about court politics. He came to find her in the greenhouse corridor, which said something, and he sat in the iron chair beside the bench, which said something else. "The challenge is within the law," he said. "I will not insult your intelligence by suggesting otherwise. Cealdreth is old enough and positioned well enough to bring it forward, and he has documentation from Fenwick suggesting that my handling of the compact violation was influenced by personal attachment to a member of the household staff rather than impartial application of the law." Helena was quiet for a moment. "He is arguing that I was Fenwick's intended target rather than an incidental witness," she said, "and that you intervened, not as Lord Paramount enforcing the compact, but as," she paused, "as someone with a personal stake in my safety." "Yes," he said, "it is not baseless. In strict technical terms, my response was proportionate to the violation. But the speed of it, the fact that I came home when the security panel registered, which would normally have triggered a security detail rather than my personal appearance." He stopped. "Cealdreth's observers noted it, and the relationship between us," she said, "since then, makes it retroactively legible as motivation." "Yes," she thought about it carefully. "Can the challenge be answered?" "It must be answered before the full court within 30 days. I will present the evidence. I will argue that the documentation from Fenwick represents a motivated reading from a removed court member with personal grievance against my governance. The argument is strong." He paused. "But Cealdreth is also bringing a secondary motion. He is requesting that the court impose a separation requirement, a ruling that I divest myself of any personal connection to human members of my household staff as a condition of retaining my position." The word separation sat between them like a stone. "That is within his right to request?" she asked. "Within the letter of the law, just barely. There is an old blood law provision, last invoked in 1790, that allows the court to require a Lord Paramount to sever connections deemed likely to compromise their impartiality. It has not been used since then because no one since then has had both the standing to invoke it and sufficient cause. Cealdreth has both." Helena looked at the orchids in the third bay. They were in full bloom now. 3 weeks of careful bloom, 3 weeks of something that felt like proof that patience and correct attention could repair things that looked past saving. "What do you want to do?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I want," he said carefully, "to contest the challenge, answer the motion, and retain both my position and my relationship with you. Whether that is possible simultaneously is what the court will determine. And if it is not a pause that cost him something, then the questions becomes which I can least endure losing." She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the open expression she had come to know, the one that was so different from the regal, careful face he presented to everything else. "I will not be the reason you lose 4 centuries of work," she said. "I will not let you sacrifice your position for Helena," he said, and his voice was very quiet. 4 centuries of work has produced a great deal that is worth protecting. It has not produced what you produce in a Thursday morning in a greenhouse corridor." He held her gaze. "I am not suggesting that you are more important than the blood law compact or the welfare of everyone it protects. I am suggesting that any version of my life in which I have removed you from it to satisfy Cealdrith Voss's political ambitions is not a version I am willing to inhabit without first exhausting every alternative. She held the weight of that for a long moment. Then let us think, she said, about what every alternative looks like. They spent 3 days building the case. Helena requested, through official channels, a copy of the last complete record of the 1790 separation motion. And when it arrived, she read it 4 times and found in it something that she brought to Isidore on the 4th evening with the quiet certainty of someone who has found the thing they were looking for. The 1790 motion, she said, spreading the documents across the study desk, was granted because the human connection in question had been established within the Lord Paramount's residential staff during his term of office. The court ruled that a relationship formed under conditions of professional authority constituted an inherent compromise of impartiality. She looked up. The 1790 ruling has a footnote. Provision 3, subsection 4. The separation requirement does not apply if the human party in the relationship can be demonstrated to have acted independently of their own agency and judgment in ways that supported rather than benefited from the Lord Paramount's position. He was reading the footnote. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The security panel, he said. I pressed it, she said, not because you told me to, not because I was confused or panicking. I pressed it because I made a strategic judgment that your interests and the interests of the compact would be better served by documented evidence than by my managing the situation alone. I pressed it knowing it would bring you into direct contact with a compact violation, which is precisely what the Lord Paramount is supposed to respond to, not as personal rescue, but as enforcement. And the cast-iron pan, he said, and there was a warmth in it. Self-defense under Provision 12, she said, which I cited to Fenwick in real time, which is in the security recording. He looked at her across the desk with the full weight of 431 years, and something that was not yet entirely at peace with how much it felt. You have built a legal defense for our relationship, he said. I have identified the existing provisions of the blood law compact that already protect it, she said precisely. I did not build anything. I read what was there. Extraordinary, he said very quietly, and it was not the word an employer used to an employee. The court convened in the Nocturne Court's formal chamber, which was beneath the city in a space that had been excavated and appointed in the 17th century and had been updated with modern technology in ways that made it look simultaneously ancient and efficient. Helena attended not as a party to the proceedings, but as a witness, called formally by Isidore's advocate, a vampire named Thessaly Core, who had the precise economical manner of someone who had been practicing law for 200 years and had very little patience for wasted effort. Cealdrith Voss sat on the opposing sides of the chamber, with Fenwick behind him and 3 other court members of his alliance flanking him, and he was, Helena observed, exactly what she had expected from everything Isidore had told her, old in the way that was visible even in an immortal face, white-haired like all his kind, but with something carved and deliberate about his features, pale eyes that moved over the room with the settled patience of someone who had been planning this for a very long time. He looked at Helena exactly once. He looked at her with the professional assessment of someone calculating a variable. She looked back with the professional stillness of someone who has been looked at and found wanting and has ceased to find it relevant. Thessaly Core presented the case with the efficiency of someone disassembling a complicated structure piece by piece, the security footage, Helena's witness statement, the formal court recorder's documentation, the Provision 12 self-defense notation, the Provision 3 subsection 4 footnote from 1790, the clear evidentiary record of Helena pressing the panel not in panic but in deliberate strategic judgment, which was verifiable from the timestamp of the recording and the fact that she had told Fenwick explicitly what she was doing and why before she did it. Cealdreth's advocate argued with considerable skill. The relationship itself was not in question, they acknowledged, but the fact that it had developed within the household, within the power structure of the Lord Paramount's residence, created the precise conditions the 1790 precedent was designed to address. Thessaly Core stood up and said, with magnificent brevity, the 1790 precedent was designed to address relationships in which the human party's actions were shaped by deference to the vampire lord's authority. The record demonstrates that Miss Wren's actions in the incident of record were independent, strategic, legally informed, and served the interest of the compact rather than the interests of any personal relationship. She cited specific provisions of the Blood Law Compact to a violator in real time. She prioritized documented enforcement over personal safety. The footnote applies. The court deliberated for 4 hours. Helena sat in the waiting corridor and did not pace, because pacing would not accomplish anything. And she thought about orchids and iron chairs and the look on a vampire's face when something he had sealed away discovered that one door was still unlocked. Isidore sat beside her, which she understood was itself a statement, and they did not speak. But at some point his hand found hers on the bench between them and held it with the careful precision of something chosen rather than reflexive. And she held it back. The court found in Isidore's favor on the main challenge. The secondary motion was denied on the grounds of the 1790 footnote, which the court noted had not been properly invoked in Cealdreth's petition. Fenwick's documentation was formally entered as a compromised source, given his status as a removed court member with grievance of record. Cealdreth Voss received the ruling with the composed grace of someone who had been playing a long game and was entirely capable of adjusting his timeline. He did not protest. He inclined his head toward Isidore with the formality of an opponent who acknowledges a move well played, and left, and Fenwick left behind him. And that, for the moment, was that. The corridor outside the chamber was quiet when they emerged. Thessaly Core said something to Isidore in a language Helena did not speak, and Isidore responded briefly. And then Thessaly left with the brisk efficiency of someone whose professional obligation is complete. Helena stood in the corridor looking at the stone and steel wall opposite, and then Isidore was standing beside her, and she turned to look at him. "The footnote," he said, "the footnote." She agreed. "You found it. Someone had to read the document," she said. "You were busy being the Lord Paramount, Helena." He said her name, the way he had been saying it since the kitchen, like it was something he had decided was his to say. "There are things I should say to you, and I have been arranging them for some time, and the arrangement has not been going as efficiently as I would like." She waited. "I have spent 431 years building a life that was structurally sound," he said. "That was the goal. Sound structure. No points of vulnerability that could not be accounted for and managed. I was extremely effective at it." He paused. "And then a woman who reads root systems and cites blood law provisions to vampires in real time, sat in a chair in my greenhouse and looked at me as if I was a person rather than a position, and I found myself with a door I could not close. Helena's throat was tight with something she was not going to apologize for. "I love you," he said, which came out with the directness of someone who has decided that 400 years of careful phrasing is not serving them well. I am aware of the complications that attend that statement. I am aware that the practical architecture of a relationship between us requires navigation of things that would not arise between two humans. I am aware that I am asking something substantial of you when I ask you to stay in a life that will continue to involve courts and challenges and the particular variety of danger that accompanies my position. He stopped. I am asking it anyway, and I am telling you that whatever you require from me in return, I will not find too costly. Helena looked at him for a long moment. "You said you were going to close that door," she said. "After Sarah, I did close it," he said. "I was very thorough. I went through every room and locked every mechanism I could find." He held her gaze. "One was already unlocked when you arrived. I did not notice it until it was too late to correct, and now, he said, "I am not interested in correcting it." She crossed the corridor and stood in front of him, and she said, "I love you too. I have been aware of this for some time. I found it inconvenient. Unprecedented but inconvenient," he said, and there was that almost law, warm and real. "Yes," she said, "both of those." He took her face in his hands with the careful precision she had come to love about the way he touched things, the precision of someone who understands fragility without assuming it, and he kissed her in the stone corridor beneath the city, and it was warmer than the first time and more certain. And outside, London continued its indifferent motion, and the Blood Law Compact continued its 600 pages of carefully negotiated coexistence. And in the greenhouse corridor above, the orchids were in bloom. The months that followed were not without their difficulties. Ceoldreth Voss did not abandon his ambitions, but he pursued them through channels that did not directly involve Isidore's personal life, and Isidore navigated those challenges with the competence of 4 centuries of practice, now with the particular quality of attention that comes from having something worth protecting and having acknowledged that fact out loud. Helena navigated her own adjustments with the pragmatic thoroughness she brought to everything. She moved from the staff quarters to the East Wing, which was a transition that required a quiet conversation with Marta, who received it with the particular expression of someone who has seen this particular shape of thing coming for some time and has reserved judgment until the situation clarified itself. "He has been different since you came," Marta said, which was everything she said on the subject, and everything that needed saying. Helena kept the greenhouse corridor on Thursdays. She kept the orchids. She continued reading, voraciously and systematically, every piece of vampire political history and blood law documentation she could access, because knowledge was the most portable protection she had ever found, and because the life she was building required her to be formidably informed rather than romantically dependent. Isidore, who had spent 400 years wishing the people he cared about had been better armed against the world, found this, she knew, deeply right. He taught her things too. Not how to be supernatural, which she was not and never would be, but how to read a courtroom, how to understand the particular grammar of vampire politics, how to identify what a statement meant versus what it said, which was a skill he had developed over centuries and which she received, he told her, with the open expression that was still new enough to be remarkable, with a speed that suggested she had been thinking in those terms for a long time without the vocabulary. She met the other courts. Not Cealdreth's, not yet, but two of the others, in formal settings that required preparation and composure and the willingness to sit in a room full of very old, very powerful creatures, and be looked at with the full weight of their assessment. She did not look away from any of them. She held her ground with the same calm precision she had held it in the kitchen, and when the blood warden of the Eastern Court, an ancient vampire named Severin Duskhold, who was reputed to have the best reading of character on any supernatural council in Europe, said to Isidore, in her presence, and evidently intentionally so, "She will do." Helena understood it was the closest thing to enthusiastic endorsement she was likely to receive from that quarter. "High praise," she said to Isidore on the way home. From Severin, "Genuinely unprecedented," he said. There was a night, several months into this new shape of their life, when Helena found Isidore in the West Wing again. This time the door was properly fixed, but it was open, and the light was on, and he was standing at the window with the letter in his hand. He had had the mirror's frame repaired and regilded, the glass replaced, and it stood against the east wall, now reflecting the room back in the lamplight. He heard her come in, because he always heard her, and he turned, and he held out his hand, and she crossed the room and took it. "I have been thinking about Sarah," he said. "What have you been thinking?" "That she would have liked you enormously," he said. "She would have been approximately your age now. She was the kind of person who looked at what a thing needed rather than what it was supposed to need." He held the letter carefully. "I have been thinking that keeping this room sealed was not honoring her. I think she would have found it self-indulgent." "I think," Helena said carefully, "that grief takes whatever form it takes. And I think you have been doing something different with it lately." "Yes," he said. "I think I have." He looked at the mirror. "I have been letting her be dead instead of keeping her frozen at the moment of loss. The distinction is, it is difficult to describe. It means she gets to be a person in your memory rather than a wound," Helena said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "that is it exactly." He put the letter back in the small cedar box on the shelf beside the window, where it sat among other objects she had seen him handle carefully over the months, a silver button, a small carved bird, the kinds of things that represent a life to the people left holding them. He closed the lid. He did not lock it. The West Wing stayed open after that. Sometimes Helena came there to read, because the window seat was exceptional, and the light from the frosted glass was the particular quality that her eyes liked. Sometimes Isidore came to find her there and sat across the room working through correspondence, and the silence between them was not an absence but a presence, the comfortable fullness of two people who have stopped performing calm for each other and arrived at it. Genuinely, there were more challenges over the years that followed. Cealdreth Voss eventually mounted a direct political challenge through the international council that governed all 5 courts, and that one was larger and more complex and required 6 months of preparation and testimony and court politics, that Helena navigated from Isidore's side with the competence she had been building systematically since the night she first pressed the emergency panel. The challenge failed. Cealdreth accepted it with the same composed grace as before and went back to his long timeline, and Isidore said, walking out of the international court session, "He will try again in 30 years or 50 years, then we will answer it again," Helena said. in 30 years or 50 years. He looked at her. "You are talking about your own aging," he said, not as an accusation. As the thing it was, the vast and complicated practical question that they had been circling for months. "I am talking about it, yes," she said. "Are you ready to?" They talked about it that night and many nights after. The blood law compact had provisions. There were processes, old and significant ones, not to be entered into lightly, involving formal petitions to the court, waiting periods, and medical evaluations, all designed around the fact that the transformation of a human into a vampire was irreversible and carried the full weight of that irreversibility in every procedural step leading to it. Isidore was not casual about it. He was not romantic about it in the way that would have been easier but less honest. He laid out every practical and philosophical dimension of the choice with the thoroughness of someone who wanted to be certain the person he loved was choosing with full information rather than sentiment. Helena listened to all of it. She asked questions, specific and practical, and sometimes uncomfortable, the way she asked all questions. She thought about it for a long time, not rushing the thinking, not performing certainty she had not yet arrived at. She arrived at it, clearly and completely. I want to stay," she said, "with you, in the way that makes staying possible." He was very still for a moment. "I want that as well," he said. "I have been wanting it and not allowing myself to name it because naming it felt like pressure." "Name it," she said. "You are allowed to want things." The petition was filed. The waiting period was observed. The evaluations were completed. All of it was done with the care it deserved, and, on the other side of all of it, Helena Wren went through a transformation that was difficult and strange, and like nothing she could have prepared for. And on the other side of that was something new, and she stood in the greenhouse corridor on a Thursday morning and looked at the orchids in the third bay, which were blooming again because she had kept up the care schedule even through everything, and Isidore stood beside her. And she turned to look at him and saw, in his silver and violet eyes, a reflection of the thing she felt, which was not a simple feeling and could not be compressed into simple words, but which was, in its most essential form, the thing that happens when you find a door still unlocked in a place where all the doors were supposed to be closed. "The orchids are well," she said. "They are," he agreed. He was looking at her the way he looked at things he had stopped taking for granted, which was everything that mattered to him. "You are different today. I am the same," she said, "in the ways that count. The rest is detail." He smiled, which was still something she collected, each instance of it, because it was genuine in the way that genuine things are when they have been rare. He took her hand, which was no longer warm in the old sense but was his, and they stood in the greenhouse corridor with the morning light filtering through the frosted upper windows, and the orchids' blooms blooming in the third bay, and the house around them settled into the particular quiet of a building that has found its proper inhabitants and has stopped holding itself in reserve. There was a ceremony, eventually, before the full Nocturne Court, not the transformation, which was private, but a formal acknowledgement of the bond, which was public, in the way that court bonds between vampire lords and their chosen partners were required to be under the blood law compact. It was less theatrical than outsiders might have expected, and more politically significant than most weddings Helena had attended as a human. Ceildreth Voss sent a formal gift of acknowledgement, which Isidore received with the measured diplomatic courtesy of someone who knows that even an opponent's concession deserves acknowledgement, and Severin Duskhold attended in person, which was Thessaly Core told Helena afterward, with the closest thing to animation she had ever seen from that direction, essentially unheard of. The ceremony itself was brief and formal and contained one moment that Helena had not expected, when Isidore, standing before the court with the regal authority of 4 centuries, and the open expression he reserved only for her, said, departing from the formal script that had governed every such ceremony for 800 years, the following: "She found a door I believed was sealed. I am grateful every day that I was wrong." The court was very quiet for a moment. Then Thessaly Core made a small note in the record, because it was a deviation from precedent, and precedent must be documented, and the ceremony continued. Afterward, Helena said to him, "That was not in the script." "No," he agreed. "The court will have opinions. The court always has opinions," he said. "I have been managing their opinions for 400 years. I find I care less about them today than usual." "Unprecedented," she said. "Both accurate," he said, which was their language now. Theirs specifically, the shorthand of 2 people who have been talking long enough to have a private grammar, and she laughed, which was his favorite sound, and he said so, which was his way of saying the largest things in the smallest words. And outside the court chamber, London moved and muttered, and the city carried on its enormous, indifferent life, and none of it knew anything about the 2 people in the corridor who had found each other through a broken lock and an unlocked door, and the particular kind of stubbornness that refuses to confuse distance with safety. In the house, the west wing door stayed open. The letter in the cedar box was kept with care. The orchids bloomed. There were courts to manage, and blood law provisions to update, and political challenges to navigate, and the whole complicated, ancient, ongoing work of being what they were in the world they lived in. There was Caeldreth's long timeline, and Severin's measured judgment, and Thessaly Core's efficient advocacy, and the maintenance records, and the greenhouse schedule, and the 600 pages of compact that kept getting updated and renegotiated and argued over by creatures who had been alive long enough to understand that the most important laws were the ones that held even when they were inconvenient. All of that was true, and all of that continued. And in the middle of all of it, in the particular way that the real things sit at the center of everything else and hold it together, there was this: a vampire lord who had sealed the last room of himself against further loss, and a human woman who had walked through an unlocked door with a first aid kit and steady hands, and the particular courage of a person who does not stop thinking when they are afraid, and the understanding earned rather than given, that some doors stay unlocked because they were meant to, and some people find each other in the dark because the dark is not the problem, and the lock was never the point. The point was this: that after 431 years, in a greenhouse corridor on a Thursday morning, something that had been held at arm's length for a very long time moved one step closer and kept moving and arrived, and they were extraordinary together, in the way that 2 people are extraordinary when they have stopped pretending that caring about each other is a vulnerability rather than a foundation. And the door stayed open, and the orchids bloomed, and that was everything.